one of the other bills that's floating around there, it's called the Protecting Communities and Preserving the Second Amendment Act of 2019. And it is, I have this up here. I read this bill, and I've made numerous notes on the bill. There are, and I'm going to put this on Facebook, by the way, as well, so you all can see it too. This is one of the bills that's being put out there as a way to kind of stymie some of the further restriction stuff. Joining us on the phone right now, Senator Ted Cruz from the great Republic of Texas on this and this whole issue that Congress is grappling with right now. Senator, thanks for joining me this afternoon.
Dana, always good to be with you. Thanks for everything you do each and every day.
Of course, and we appreciate your time today. You, along with Senator Grassley, are introducing the Protecting Communities and Preserving the Second Amendment Act of 2019. I was just telling the listening audience, I read through the bill. There are some things that you hid in here that a lot of individuals, including myself, have been calling for. Are you hoping, what is your hope with this particular legislation? Because I see that some of this kind of thwarts some of the more dangerous legislation that would empower criminals and penalize the law-abiding more so. And this seems to kind of get past that, particularly where you're talking about compliance with submitting records in for the NICS checks. Tell me about this bill.
Right. Well, look, you asked what I'm hoping for. I hope we take it up, and I hope we pass it. And what you and I both understand, and your listeners understand, is we can and should go after violent criminals. Mass murderers, we should come down on them like a ton of bricks, and we should be vigorous stopping felons and fugitives and those with dangerous mental illness from committing these horrific crimes. And we can do all of that without in any way undermining the Second Amendment rights of law-abiding citizens. What the Democrats always do, and you've been fighting these battles a long time, is they focus on the law-abiding citizens instead of the bad guys. That has it exactly backwards. And so this legislation is designed to go after felons and fugitives and those with dangerous mental illness, to strengthen the background check system, to make sure that felony convictions are actually in the database.
Right, because that's been a huge problem. Thousands of them have not been submitted.
Yep. And a perfect example that you're well familiar with is the tragedy of Sutherland Springs, the worst church shooting in American history. And I've spent a lot of time at Sutherland Springs. I was in the sanctuary the day after the shooting. It remains the most horrific thing I've ever seen. One of the most maddening aspects of Sutherland Springs is that was an entirely preventable crime. The shooter there, it was already doubly illegal for him to buy a gun or own a gun. He had a felony conviction. He had a domestic violence conviction. Mm-hmm. The reason he was able to buy a gun is the Obama administration, the Air Force, never reported his felony to the background check database. So he went, purchased the gun, filled out the background check form, and he passed the background check because they didn't have his felony conviction in the database. What Grassley-Cruz does is it, number one, directed the Department of Justice to do an audit of all the federal agencies to make sure they've reported the felonies to the database, which presumably would have caught the Sutherland Springs felony conviction. But secondly, and this is critically important, every year about 50,000 felons and fugitives try to illegally buy guns. And we don't pursue charges. We don't pursue charges. The Department of Justice prosecutes about 50 a year out of 50,000. And what Grassley-Cruz says is it directs the Department of Justice to create a gun crime task force. So if a felon comes in and lies and tries to illegally buy a gun, you prosecute him and you put him in jail. And if we had passed this bill in 2013 when I introduced it, when the Sutherland Springs shooter went in and tried to illegally buy a gun and lied on the background check form, he would have been prosecuted and he would have been in federal jail instead of murdering those innocent people in that beautiful sanctuary. Absolutely. Yet this bill, the Cruz-Grassley bill, and we're talking to Senator Ted Cruz, the nationwide, it creates a task force. You also have the nationwide Project Exile expansion, and I know that they're going to be working with advising in terms of investigation and prosecution, and also looking at that non-compliance from all of these different agencies. Because, Senator, you know, if you or I were to mess up in our places of employment to where someone loses their life because of our mistake, there are severe penalties for that, but not severe penalties for agencies who do the exact same thing. And we have proof that this is demonstrable that this has led to loss of life. Charleston was another. That was a paperwork error that former FBI Director James Comey had to come out and state. But yet there's no penalty for this. Is this going to create enough of a penalty that it is a deterrent that people will be compliant and do their jobs? Well, it's certainly designed to incentivize state and local jurisdictions. So if there's a state prosecution and felony, that they make sure to get that conviction in the database. And what works is prosecuting the violent criminals who use guns. You mentioned Project Exile, which was a tremendously effective program at the Department of Justice, where if you use a gun in a crime, you get prosecuted and you do hard time. And it's had a real record of success, reducing murders, reducing violent crimes. That's how you stop these things. But sadly, and we've seen this over and over again, when there's a tragedy, when there's a mass shooting, Democrats in the media immediately come out, and the only thing they want to focus on doing is you and me as law-abiding citizens, and trying to undermine our gun rights. And we saw it on the stage in Houston last week, where of the 10 Democratic candidates for president standing on that stage, 3 are now vocally supporting gun confiscation, the federal government forcibly confiscating our guns. That's their agenda. And that doesn't prevent crime. And in fact, if they ever succeeded in that agenda, it would increase crime because it would make law-abiding citizens more vulnerable to the criminals. That's going exactly the wrong direction.
3 quick questions for you about this. You had a back and forth with the Chicago mayor about crime rate, homicide involving illegal use of legally possessed firearms. You noted this legislation also shows that the task force is going to be working in cities that have the highest homicide rates. One problem that these cities all have is the recidivism and the minimum sentencing, the lax sentencing. Is there anything that is in this bill or that you plan to propose that is going to address that problem? Because in Chicago, according to the former Chicago police superintendent, that's the driver of over 86% of their crime is these repeat offenders.
Now, look, it is a huge problem in a city like Chicago, which year after year is near the top or at the very top in terms of how many murders happen each year. And as you know, Chicago has among the strictest gun control laws in the country. They don't work because what they do is they disarm all the victims. They disarmed all the law-abiding citizens, and the criminals, the gangbangers, don't give up their guns. And then you combine that with a lax system of prosecuting. You know, I tweeted out a story just a couple of weeks ago about a gangbanger who had repeatedly committed felonies, who had multiple gun offenses. They arrest him again, and they immediately release him out on bond. Well, if you're releasing violent criminals, it should not be a surprise that violent criminals are dangerous and they commit more crimes of violence. You
absolutely.
asked if Grassley-Cruz, what it could do about it. You know, a little bit of the history of Project Exile, which I know you know, but not all of your listeners may know about it. So Project Exile was a project that began in the Eastern District of Virginia, the U.S. Attorney's Office, where they set a policy. They said if a criminal uses a firearm in a crime, we are going to prosecute him federally, and we are going to seek hard time, 5-10 years in prison, hard time. They set that policy, and Richmond, Virginia had a murder crisis going on where the murder rate was very high. They began advertising in Richmond, Virginia, downtown Richmond, use a gun in a crime, do hard time. As a result of Project Exile, I mean, criminals began, and when there was testimony, criminals began leaving their guns at home, that they wouldn't take a gun in a crime because they knew they'd go to jail for a long time if they did, and the murder rates dropped significantly. What Grassley-Cruz does is it makes that a national program where the Department of Justice, if someone uses a gun in a crime, they get prosecuted, they go to jail. That's the best way to get these violent criminals off the streets.
Right. I know also in this bill there is discussion of, and this has come up every time we've had a mass casualty incident, there's a lot of discussion on video games. Some individuals are worried that we could be replacing gun control with game control. Yeah. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, listen, I'm a gamer myself. I grew up on video games. I think you often see some of the puritanical voices in our society trying to scapegoat video games. I'll tell you, it was interesting at Santa Fe. I spent a lot of times with the families of the victims of that shooting, and I remember one round table. Actually, President Trump was at the round table as well. And the question was asked of the families, what do you think about video games and violent video games? And one of the dads said, you know, video games are the main way that I connected with my high schooler and was able to hang out and have bonding time. And I'll confess, look, I've got an 11-year-old and 8-year-old, and when I put Caroline, our 11-year-old, to bed, right now she wants to play Gardenscapes on my iPhone, and we sit there in our bedroom playing games together. I don't think we ought to be restricting people's liberties. I think we ought to be focusing on violent criminals, and that's the fundamental distinction between good guys and bad guys. And we should protect the constitutional rights of law-abiding citizens. If you're a murderer, you're going away.
Yeah, and good to hear. I completely empathize with that, Dad, because we have family game nights, and I play Call of Duty, so we have family game nights, and it is, as the kids get older, that is a way to have some family time together. I know that there's the red flag bill legislation that's going through the Senate. There's also some movement in the House with pieces of legislation. There's also the Manchin-Toomey bill, which looks at universal background checks. Where do you stand on those two issues, and are you concerned about the possibility of the universal background checks, particularly creating a national registry?
I'm very concerned about that. Manchin-Toomey, when it was voted on in 2013, it was voted down. At the time, I voted no. I'm still a no on it. And the talking points for the Democrats, the talking points for the media is always, quote, universal background checks. And it helps to actually talk about the facts. As you know, background checks are required anytime you purchase a firearm from a federally licensed dealer, which is the vast majority of purchases. That's true if you purchase from a dealer at a store. That's true if you purchase from a dealer at a gun show. If you buy from a dealer, you have to do a background check. What the Democrats are talking about doing, and what the media is talking about doing, is extending that to private person-to-person sales. That means, in some of the more extreme of their proposals, a grandfather gives his grandson a shotgun to go bird hunting, and you have to go through a federal scrutiny and review. Two buddies in a hunting blind, one sells a deer rifle to the other, and they have to go through federal review. And I have two major problems with it. One, there is zero evidence that it would do anything to stop these mass murders. That's not how these criminals are getting their guns. It wouldn't have stopped the mass murderers we've seen across the country. But two, the instant you mandate that every person-to-person sale have a federal review and regulation, the only way to enforce that is a national gun registry, and a gun registry is how a confiscation plan is carried out. And Dana, as you know, even a year or two ago, when you or I would raise the danger of confiscation, the media would laugh at us, say, you guys this is conspiracy theory, this will never happen. It's worth underscoring again, 3 of the 10 Democrats on the presidential debate stage are openly and aggressively calling for mandatory, forcible federal gun confiscation. So I think that is a mistake. I think we should focus instead, we should pass instead Grassley-Cruz and focus on the bad guys while protecting the constitutional rights of law-abiding citizens.
There you go. Senator Ted Cruz, appreciate your time with us today talking about these issues. I've had more questions about this and your bill also in particular from listeners than almost anything else. So I appreciate you explaining that for everyone today as well. We'll talk with you again soon. God bless and good luck. Thanks so much.
God bless. And thank you for your courage. And let me say in particular the CNN town hall you participated in. Their treatment of you was shameful. It was disgraceful. And you showed ferocious courage going into to what it wasn't right how they went after you, and I appreciate your standing up for my constitutional rights.
Well, thank you so much, Senator Ted Cruz. Appreciate the kind words. We'll talk again, and we'll be watching all the happenings in Congress. Thank you again, sir.